Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations. Where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on the page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Hello, I'm Carla Curry, SDSA, and welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome set decorator David Hack, who's also SDSA, to discuss his amazing work on the really gritty, intense Netflix limited series, American Primeval. David, how are you today?
I'm great, Carla. It's so great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. We've known each other a long time. It's nice to see your
Yeah.
face again.
Yeah, it's been looking forward to this all week.
Yeah, me too. So, I wanna start out by just asking you, I remember when you very first started this project, you told me we were talking about it, and you said it's not we're not calling it a Western.
Yeah, it kind of started the first time I was got that inkling. I'd talked to Renee Reed, our production designer, obviously in the interview process, and then at one point they wanted me to meet Peter Berg before they finalized everything. I said, "Great, where and when?" And they said, "Well, we're going to be scouting." This was way early on, and they're looking for the site for the fort, and they were on the Cochiti Pueblo between Santa Fe and Albuquerque and told me to come out there and meet them. So I drove out there, and they were along the Rio Grande and what we call the Bosque, which is where all the big trees are, and there were meadows, and walking around and talking about this fort. And it was cold, and I remember walking up, and he turned around, and they introduced me, and he stuck his hand out, and he shook my hand, and he like slapped me on the shoulder, and he goes, "You're pretty solid, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, we're gonna be outside. We're gonna be doing things we've never done before. We're gonna be up in the mountains, out in the valleys. Are you ready?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I'm ready." And I remember you had told me, he's a real gung ho guy. And I thought to myself, I still got a little gung ho in the tank. Let's go. And then he started talking about it. And he said, "We're not doing a Western." And he goes, "This is a survival story. This is a pioneer story. This is a battle of people in a power struggle." And just kind of in the moment when he started talking about that, everyone thinks 1880s westerns, shootout at high noon. And once then I got the scripts and started reading them, and I was like, well, this is certainly not a western. Um, there is no piano player in a saloon. There's nothing like that. These people are on really the edge of the planet at this point. 1850s, we had the gold rush in 49. So people had gone west. The Oregon Trail was there. But then the settlers started to come. And Bridger, the fort, which is where I'd met him standing in this field, not fully understanding the scope we were going to take this thing to at this point. Um, just started to sink in. The more I read it, the less I saw westerns, the more I saw just people struggling to survive. And really kind of everyone talks about the lawlessness. This really is. This is people who are doing things where they have no fear of, consequence. Their only consequence is their own demise. They're doing whatever they have to do to fight the elements. And, you're in Missouri or farther east in Pennsylvania, and you think, I'm going to go west and make my claim, and it's just going to be great. And then all of a sudden you get to Fort Bridger, and it's this conglomeration of all sorts of intersection of people. And you're looking at the Rocky Mountains that you have to get over to get to this land in Oregon or Northern California. And that's really what Bridger turned into. The fort was Jim Bridger came down. He was a famous mountain man, came down and settled where he found sweet water at the actual location. We had several different consultants. One of them was this guy, Dudley Gardner, who was a PhD in history and taught at Western Wyoming University, as well as other places. And he actually excavated the original site where Bridger was originally
Really?
built. It was burned down at one point, and he led the excavation, so he had wealth of knowledge. college, and it was great. And he started providing me with diaries. And once he started doing that, I just said, "Send me everything you got," and I would just read endlessly about these people's struggles, all the different types, from the military to the Mormons to just pioneers, fancy people from escaping whatever from the East. The show, rather, is brutal at times and doesn't hide that fact. But some of the things I read were just way beyond. I can't even imagine what they went through. There was one where I was reading this. He was just a soldier in the cavalry, and how he had woken up. It was so cold, and 70 mules had froze to death overnight. What were they going to do, and all this kind of thing. And I remember reading that in the morning over coffee, getting ready to go to work. And it was cold here. And I went out and got my car, and I was like, "Ooh, it's cold. I got to warm the car up." And I thought to myself, "Oh my God, what, what am I? Would have never made it." You know, these people know what cold is, what lack of water is, lack of game. Another thing that Bridger provided was he had, all sorts of pigs and cattle and all that big operation that he would restock people with supply.
Let's back up just a little bit because the opening scene in that series is this expansive shot of kind of the West, and there's like the train tracks that are just they haven't even gone past that point yet. And just the desolation, the feeling of desolation that, I think I felt as the shot widens up and shows that I just can't even imagine the feeling of people that were coming from back east on a train and got that far, and then you have to pivot. You have to figure out how you're gonna, finish your journey. And, I think that was a really, really emotional start to that series, just seeing that. And then, it progressed and went into Fort Bridger. And Fort Bridger was like its own little town. It had all of the ingredients of a town. The butcher, the barber doctor.
Mhm. Yeah, we had the butcher, the barber shop slash doctor. We had bathhouses set up. We had a mercantile. We had a blacksmith. We had the stables. We had a laundry. We had a brothel, and then we had Bridger's, home base, his building as well, kind of built up on a berm overlooking it all. And then, it was, and the surrounding building itself with the guard towers and the gangways. And then you step outside the gates, and it's a conglomeration of kind of barnacles almost, people who were just hanging on outside, the workers that worked in there. We had elements of Native Americans out there and trappers and all sorts of different types of people, pioneers, and that would come and go, and then, you had a little bit of an encampment of cavalry on one edge of it. And each one of those environments, always when we do these things as decorators, we want them to see every inch of everything. And there's just not enough time. It was so vast and so expansive. I mean, it was there, and we shot, extensively throughout. But then, through the editing process, things don't fit. You don't have time for it, or whatever the reason may be.
And I'll insert right there that, a lot of people, um, when you tell them what you do, that you work in the movie business
Yeah.
and that you're a decorator, and they think that's just the greatest job ever, that all you do is shop. It's so much more involved in that.
Oh
You
yeah, it's much
The
more.
the not just the acquiring of everything, and hopefully you can do that, but the whole research and the experts that you employ and, all of that. I mean, talk a little bit about, your different people.
I sought out different experts in tanning, in butchering, in distilling, all those things, how to make the soap for the lye, for the laundry, all those things, how the wells work.
Well, I know you had, like the guy that you were telling me about that was helping you with the animals and hanging them up and how to butcher
Sure.
and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was, and it was interesting about it was he was a great guy, and he was kind of a classically trained full animal butcher. And so we brought him out, and he showed up and he was talking about the proper way to hang things and drain things and all. It was different for this was like an operation of a meat packing plant. When you're in the field and you field dress an animal, then you bring it to him and he butchers it out to make it palatable to can or preserve or dry or cook right on the spot. And we had everything from mice to full grown pigs and every animal in between that we put in that butcher shop. And he was just really great on just trying to make it, you think you tell someone, okay, let's hang these animals here. You never know what you might get, but he was very specific on the reasons, the way you hang things, the proper way, to brace things, all all made a difference. And like we had one that was a sheep that we kind of did this Patagonia style big cross. It was some image we'd seen that we just thought was a very kind of impactful, creepy image. And I had to source the animal properly and go through all the correct states with the Animal Protection Agency. This was an animal that we had no part of taking its life in any way. And that's the case with a lot of things. And a lot of them, the fakes and the real ones, really just blended together. We only had a couple of real animals that we ever used, and they were just kind of for sale animals that I came across when looking for other things, hides and whatnot, and dug it out of the bottom of some guy's freezer. And that's where you go with it. But he was really great at that. And the distiller was another one. We didn't really get to see a lot of that, but he was a great vodka maker there in Santa Fe. And he came out and just fell in love with the process and showed me the proper way of setting up a primitive still. He had, loved distilling and was a great, all these people who love these crafts, they have such deep knowledge of it. And if you just give them a chance and ask questions and just let them talk and show interest, people want to tell you, what they love. And if you show that you're excited about it, then it just provides you as a decorator with all the tools to really go deep and do things that you know are done for a reason. And it makes the viewer, I think, get a little education from it. Do you get to see where they get the water and how it's distilled and the corn that's mashed and all that kind of thing and all the different steps to get to that bottle of whiskey that they sure want. And all of them were done on big scale. This place covered quite a big territory. I think it was, football field size place.
It looks bigger than that.
Yeah, it feels it. I don't have the numbers on the actual footprint, but yeah, it is. And like the meat and like this, we had meat drying racks, right? And so I had all this fake meat manufactured and a lot of our animals by a guy in Austin. I think Steve Joyner, and his fabrication team made all these silicone copies of things. So I would have plenty of different types of jerky and slabs of beef and quarters of pigs and all this that were just excellent in execution and just done on a huge scale. And he looked at me and goes, "How many fish do you want?" I was like, "I need like 300." And he's like, "You're kidding me?" He had guys going around there, "How many slabs of meat?" "Give me 200 slabs of meat." And he's like, "Are you serious? How are you going to display all this?" And so we built these 20-foot tall drying racks. And we had stuff drying at all the Native American camps and different things, but Bridger had such a big operation. We were trying to just let people know that this was like, an island in the storm. They had just come 1,200 miles from Missouri across vast prairie where there wasn't a lot of game left. There had been so much traveling for the gold rush. All the deer and small game had been decimated. When you read the stories, they would have to travel 5 miles off the trail just to find game to hunt. So you think about people showing up in a very precarious situation. Their animals can't have water for a while. All these kind of things that you don't think about when you're just headed out. You think that, oh, it's a grassland. No, it's a desert. It's grass growing there, but it's devoid of water on the surface and drinkable water.
Well, water and firewood. I mean, along with that, there's, it's hard to find firewood when you're on the prairie.
Yeah, yeah, it's picked clean from people that are there. That's why they use all the, dung to cook with and all that kind of stuff.
And I did notice one thing about that fort that's real evident up front is the mud. Is that something that you guys created and maintained, or were you affected by the weather?
No, it was definitely a plan from the start. The ground there, being that it was just a prairie, they came in and put down sublayer and then the dirt on top so that we would have a layer of mud, but it wouldn't be so deep. You would have a hard surface under it of caliche and the dirt on top in the main ways and all. And the water trucks rolled on it, in the morning before everyone showed up, out the water trucks come, and then the evening before we went back, the water trucks would hit it all again. And, that kinda just added this layer of muck that was just always.
It became kind of part of the definitely part of the set.
Yeah, yeah, and the puddles and the light that would reflect at night.
And seeing the feet go through it and the wheels go through it and, all that.
Yeah, and it just makes a different kinda ambient noise when you hear animals sloshing through and the wagons it's kinda hard on the dressing at times, I will admit that. The crew in general, but we got through it all with really very little incidents of trouble at all.
That's awesome because I know you probably like we live and die by the Weather Channel. We get up in the morning and look at the weather, and we go to sleep at night and we look at the weather just to see what we're gonna be faced with the next day.
Yeah, in New Mexico, it can just vary rapidly. There were days we would have snow in the morning, sun would come out, the snow would go, evaporate off, then all of a sudden rain and hail would hit, and then the sun's back out, and you would see it all coming. We were out in these wide, vast open areas, you would see it coming, and there are the times where you have the rain here in New Mexico where it's raining above you, but it never makes it to the ground. It just dries in the air as it's coming down, so you think you're in for this big storm, and nothing really happens.
Yeah, I noticed that, and I noticed that there were also a lot of not a lot, but quite a few rain scenes, that, I'm presuming y'all created as well.
Yes, we did. Yeah, we had effects. We had a great effects team. Matt Kutcher and his team were, there was a lot on the crew that were very familiar with working with Pete. They had done several movies with him, if not more than several. And I would say, his cameraman and the effects guys, I was kind of the new kid on the block. This is my first go with him. And so it took a while for them to kind of size me up and realize that I was in it to win it too. We had our wardrobe, costume designer, Virginia Johnson, was excellent. And once I started seeing some of her buckskins and Native American things, I was like, okay, I've got to really up my game, which led to us, manufacturing teepees and all sorts of parfleches and everything. We dove way deep into the Native American culture.
You have, like, advisors? I know, I've always kinda had that luxury of having an advisor that, you wanna make sure it's right.
Yeah, we had a great advisor, Julie O'Keefe, who was well known and very versed in, advising films and her knowledge of different tribes and being able to put us in touch with specific tribes. That's what we went a step farther with her being our liaison to put us in touch with the Eastern Shoshone representative, a Paiute, a Ute, all these people. When I decided, Renee kind of said, how can we make these teepees great? And we kind of saw some imagery of some old teepees in museums that were actually made from tanned buffalo hides and elk hides and whatnot. And so she said, do you think we can afford to do it? And I said, well, let me see what it takes. And so we pushed into it. And I met a guy through Julie who is a Shoshone who lives on a reservation up in South Idaho. And his name was Robert Perry. He goes by Dude. And his native name I can't pronounce correctly, so I won't attempt it, but he was a great guy, uh, very into the old ways of tanning, brain tanning, all that. He's the largest one that still does brain tanning, the old ways, all that kind of thing. He has a place called, um, The Hide Shop, and so once I met him and talked to him, he maybe said 5 words to me the whole conversation, and then I said, "Well, let's see what we can do," and he's, "Yep." And so we started getting the hides and the dimensions and all, and he did a couple test things for us, the hand stitched and I said, "Let's do it. Let's build 4 of these." And so he started tanning hides, tanning hides, tanning hides. And he on the they weren't inexpensive by any regard, so I knew it was gonna be a great benefit that way for the reservation because he said, "I'm gonna hire all the people from here," you know, and we got into it, and he got the first one done, and we were so excited, and he said, "David, you don't know what you've done." And I said, "Well, I'm just so happy to, provide this income for these people and, try and represent this properly." And he goes, "No, these are people that a lot of them are old and they're just kind of been cast aside and forgotten." He said, "There are people here who struggled trying to get their lives right with alcohol and drug addiction, and they're just stuck here on the reservation, almost forgotten." And you go, "I put the word out that I had work if you would come to this big metal building they have there." And he started kind of a sewing circle. I don't know how else to describe it. And it started with the old people showing up and just drinking coffee and stitching. And I'm setting more and more hides. So more and more people are coming and our deadline's coming. So it gears up. He has 50 or 60 people sewing. And he said by the end of it, it was like they're telling stories to the young people and little kids are running around and everyone's making a good living and they're just communicating stories about their great grandparents who actually lived in teepees. And he goes, it just revitalized this place. And I get kind of choked up when I talk about it because so much in our business feels disposable because we have to make it so quick and out. And this was something that, we get these moments where we can, do something special for someone, Yeah. And this was one, I see it in little ways where I'll help someone, at a garage sale and say, "I'll buy everything in your garage. I'm doing a garage," that kind of thing. But this really on another level just made me proud, what we do as artists and the people we come in contact with, you just never know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best parts of our job are the people that we just pass through. We are, I say we will, my vendors are my friends for life. These are people that you find, and you and I have been doing it a long time, and I've still got vendors and people that I met 30, 40 years ago that are still in my phone and I still keep in contact with. But what a wonderful story that you were able to impact a community. I mean, that is the perfect.
Right, and you know what? It was they returned it tenfold with these teepees when they showed up. Once our seniors got hold of them and got the correct paint on them, I mean, everyone was so into the details of it all, and we got them set up, and you got in there, and I had it all dressed, and, the furs are down, and the parfleches are up, and the medicine bags, and all that kind of thing is inside these places. It really felt like a little time capsule, and you're out there where they were, in these great environments we were shooting in. And, I'll tell a quick story. When we did the Shoshone Village, um, we got them all set up, and that was our biggest Native American encampment, and we'd shot there a few days, and everything kinda got settled in, right? And we're headed towards some night work we have to do where they're having a big celebration, and they're getting ready to go to battle and all that kinda thing, and they brought in these drummers, Shoshone drummers, who were, like, revered men and, in this process of doing the drumming, and they were old. They brought them in, and we had to help them down into this valley, literally, sometimes carrying them in their chairs and whatnot, and there was a whole team of people handling them, of course. And we got them to the spot, and they put them in a spot, and they had drums there for them to kinda warm up and practice on, and then it was kind of break, everyone go get something to eat, and the crew leaves and transports out, and the extras are eating, in their thing, and I'm there. I just stayed behind. I just wanted to be in the place and walk around and see it clear of people and, see if there's anything we need to adjust. And a few of my other people were there. And the special effects guys started getting their smoke machines going. So it's drifting and the fires are smoldering. And I just hear, and it was a big valley that led to a mountain with a kind of a box canyon. And I just hear them start practicing their drumming. I just start hearing it and they start singing and the extras at this point are starting to come back in. I look around, I'm like the only crew person I see, in this place, and the smoke's drifting, and they're walking around. I'm hearing this music, and I'm just like transported. It was like the magic was just happening so big as the sun went down. It was just like a pinnacle moment on the show for me, you know?
It's a life moment,
Yeah.
That's another thing. We're just so lucky to be
Yeah.
able to be in these places and experience all this.
Yeah. Yeah. It was crazy. It was just, you know, one I'll take with me to the end for sure, you know.
Were they in the show? Did they end up being in the show?
Oh, they were there, yes. No, they were there. They dressed them, and the big thing for me was to figure out what they were gonna be sitting on, 'cause they had their, like, camp chairs, and so I had to, like, at the last minute, they weren't gonna sit on a log, they were just couldn't, for that length of time, and so we had to immediately try and fabricate, disguise the chairs and all that, but being dark and the fire and the smoke, it worked out, but that was the only there's always one little thing, I'll throw a curveball at you. You're standing there in this glorious moment, says someone turns around, the ADs are going, "What are you gonna do about this chair?" Kinda broke the moment, but I needed a reality check because I had left my body.
Well, that's a good thing,
Yeah,
that's a good thing
yeah,
to have that moment to be able to leave your body for just
yeah,
that long. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the and I noticed too that you did have different versions of Indian villages for the different tribes and stuff. They looked very different, and even the ones outside the fort were different.
yeah, the ones outside the fort, that was more of a kind of like a working class neighborhood in my mind, those were the people that were employed to work there, that worked at the laundry or worked at the mercantile or whatever, and they lived in this existence out there, which, actually was the case, in reading some of the accounts of the fort, there were these kinda outside societies, and really it was the Native American women that really ran the fort in reality. Bridger and his partner at the time were, of course, the mouthpieces and leaders of it all. But the work being done was generally done by Native American women who, congregated outside there. And there was kind of that bridge where there was Native Americans that were sort of starting to be assimilated in some ways.
With their clothing and
Yeah, having that kind of thing. So we saw more of metal cups and tin plates and that kind of thing outside the fort. Then we got to the Ute camp, which was more, they were more of a uh, kind of a, I don't want to say, they were kind of hunter gatherers in the fact that they would come upon things, and scavenge them and all that. And then you get to the Shoshone who are still trying to hang on to their life and their existence in the ways. And it was a struggle at first to try and figure out how to make them different from each other. We're doing so much of it, but in the end, I think you're right. Just kind of the ways of trying to. When we got to the Shoshone, that was the most authentic that I could possibly imagine being. And in the course of it, we had done the Ute before this, so it was kind of a tune-up for the big one. It was like Ute was maybe only about 8 TPs, and Shoshone was about 25, I think, 23, 24, 25. Yeah, we had, all the shield stands and all the drying racks and all the different variations of stuff.
poles. I know how hard it is to find the poles. How far you have to go to find poles.
You do. Way back up there in the Montana, we had a semi load of them brought down, hundreds and hundreds of, and then we've had to make, and, the effects that helped us, obviously with this, with our burning ones, we had to make copies, out of concrete of many things, drying racks, all that kind of stuff, so we could burn them for days on end. And I had, bought, welding shielding blankets and had them cut into unusual shapes, and yeah, had them cut into hides, and we used steel cable to stitch it all together. It was great, but by the end of the day, you were very itchy. You know? But it was the only way we could figure out how to make it last.
That's a great solution, though. What a great
Yeah,
solution. And
yeah.
this kind of segues into the all of you had a lot of burning and a lot of destruction and it was like reality check when it comes to the pioneers trying to get across that landscape. Um, I don't know how you prepared for that, um, with the amount of all I can say is loss and damage, you know,
Mhm.
because you had wagons. I noticed during the Mormon massacre, there were the wagons that burned, the
Yep,
cavalry,
yep.
that burned, the Indian village burn. There was just so much that was lit on fire, and I know that there's movie magic involved in some of that,
Right.
that it doesn't actually happen, but it did seem like there was a huge amount of debris and
Mhm.
burned things that you had to prepare for.
Yeah, we would buy, every trunk box we could find, obviously, to do this,
That's
brought
hard. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
and trucked in lots of stuff from ISS, the stuff we didn't burn, barrels and period correct crates and all that. They were really great suppliers on that. But it got to where we would just cold call all these different antique shops and go, "What do you have that you can't fix?"
yeah,
You know, where is your warehouse of parts and pieces?
great.
And we bought everything we could. Had a great team of buyers that really got out there and beat the bushes, so to speak, to come up with that. And then we fabricated a lot, especially for the fort. When I was in the fort, I was looking for kind of fort furniture, things that were primitively built and all, and it just wasn't clicking all the time, not in the volume that I needed. And I was kind of there one day, and because I was early in the process, I was out there by myself and just saw all the cast off slabs of lumber and tips of logs and things that weren't working in the building of the fort. And I thought, well, if I was building this fort, I would probably start taking these smaller pieces that and build furniture with it. And so I found this guy through my lead man, Brian DeNike. He said, "Hey," when I was trying to put together our fabrication team, he said, "I've got a guy that you should talk to. He's a prop maker. He works in the real world as a carpenter. His name's Matt Ellis. You should meet him." And I said, "Great, bring him in." And we sat and talked for a long while. And after talking with him and just kind of digging back into his experience in life, as a young man, how'd you get in business, all that kind of stuff. He had started in his 20s in Maine, being apprenticed to wooden boat building, old school wooden boat building. And I said, "So what do you think if we wanted to build, a chair out of logs and rough sawn lumber and all?" I said, "Let's do it." And I started bringing him things, and he just wouldn't use a screw. He wouldn't use a nail. Everything was brace and bit drilling and carving pegs, pounding wooden pegs, just really. And you don't think it makes a difference, but in my mind, it did for me. And it really sold, and the stuff was sturdy. I ordered all the sinew from all the places you could think of, and then I come in one day, and, one of the guys working with him, had one of our hides and was just ripping strips and throwing them in a bucket, and then we take it out, and I come back, and he's braiding them, and making all these cool, just primitive braids that we used for all sorts of purposes. And really, I find if you talk to your crew, and I know you do this too, and you dig into their past, everyone has skills and knowledge they bring. Yeah. And if you can just encourage them to not be afraid to say it, and when you see it, own it. And I mean, we all get in this business probably, especially the art department, because you have some type of creative vibe in you that maybe needs nurturing. Maybe, you don't think you're any good at it all. But I just think you can just bring it out of them, by not laughing at them, not berating them, encouraging them, letting them know that I don't have all the right choices. You're not going to have all the right choices. Let's get together and do something special. Just empowering these people really made this just kind of go next level in that regard as far as fabricating.
Think that goes back to us both, being brought up in that environment, uh, the Carrie White environment.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Lead from the front. Lead with a pat on the back and a smile, not a, shaking finger, you know? No one I never you know, you just can't buy into that blame game and all that. It's a waste of time and energy that you could be putting into something positive and really, really dive down and create. Not every show gives you this opportunity. I knew this was gonna be a fantastic opportunity, not to only do something that people will enjoy watching that maybe hadn't been seen done quite this way. Just an opportunity for me at this point in my career to just use everything in my toolbox, everything in my tool belt that I've built up over, 35 years or so in this business. and it all came into play.
That is just the best part of our job.
And, on this one, I just came across, some great collectors and people with passion for the period that are just, you have those moments where you're just like, how did I get so lucky to meet this person?
And you know what,
That
David?
was,
I think that's the good part about our job too, is that those people exist everywhere. And I
Mhm,
think you and I are both pretty lucky to be able to work on location a lot.
mhm.
And I think that's the biggest gift is being able to source those people out. And I go back to the friends for life. You made friends for life on American Primeval for sure.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, people that you will stay in touch with for the rest of your life. And I just think that's such a big bonus. We get to be creative, but we also have fun and get to, you know, find new people in our circles and careers, which is pretty fabulous. I know when we talked before, we were talking about light fixtures and drapery, and
Mhm.
those are two things that we lean on heavily. But did you have to have your own, like your designated painter, your designated scene?
Yes. Yeah, I had Ager dyers and, uh, definitely that worked with us because we had, approaching 200 blankets that we had to buy and age of all different types that had to be in all different levels. We had a 1 to 10 level of, distress on things. Of course, we were always pushing up there 8, 9, 10 on this particular project. Um, but yeah, we had Ager dyers. I had lots of stitchers that would help with, you talk about the curtains. We didn't have really traditional curtains. Early versions of the script started with us in Illinois and Missouri, kind of seeing some more of the backstory on why some of the characters fled. And that all got cut, and we just picked it up right there, like you said, there at the train station being dropped off. We missed where they came from. So originally, I was thinking I was going to need a traditional draper, but for us, it was salvaged cloth and the stitched curtains. Yeah, we constantly take old pieces of leather and hand stitch them. That's what we did over coffee in the morning, and when guys were sweeping up, it was always doing repair and stitching, and just trying to add all that and the cement mixers going, throwing things in them to beat them up and tumble them and soften them, and then once we got them in, they brought in great team of agers that would come from the scenic department after we dressed and work things over again, and then the elements just
This particular image that's up right now, oh my gosh, and, that's just stunning, in my opinion, and I think it's another level of detail that the regular viewer probably doesn't realize how important that is, that it's not just a window covering, it's an emotional window covering. That really tells a story. And it is so beautiful, and it was right behind his head, and it was beautiful. I was immediately drawn to it.
yeah, and that particular piece, in my mind, as we like to do to build backstories and all, and that little vignette there kinda lets us see that he was a mountain man. To me, that was like some of his old buckskins that when he first got there and built this was the first building built at the fort, his office kinda storeroom, and I thought, well, he wore it out, he didn't throw it away, he couldn't sleep and he stitched it up there, stuck it up there, and then it almost feels like it's a piece of a jacket that has a sleeve left on it, but the rest was made into this thing and is stained from leaking roof and all that kind of thing. And then down at the bottom, there's a bunch of bear claws in a bowl, and some maps had rolled up, and books and all that. And really, the whole idea it started off as his office was going to be a storeroom that he just was discovered in and had some conversations, and then we decided to develop it further into his office, and then it just became in my mind, it was like where he kept all the best stuff that he was trying to keep from getting taken, There was a lot of petty thievery that happened because people if you left it unattended, they needed it, they would take it. So I always thought his office is where he pulled things to keep them safe.
And I've gotta tell you that, I watched the show a couple of times, um, And I went back when I got the stills. It was like I kinda like the stills even better because I was able to zoom in and actually see the level of detail, that went into that, and it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. All the layers and layers of detail involved in that.
Yeah, it's a process, it was a big deal. And you see it, and a lot of this is built for real. That fireplace, that's a real stone fireplace, that's not faux. We built for real out there with real stones and real logs and all that kinda stuff, man, and it's still there. Yeah, yeah, we left it behind. I don't know what state it's in, of course, but, they asked to keep it up, and so I've kept it, and, yeah, it was so much fun to just gather, I mean, his desk was kind of an afterthought. That's a piece I actually got from Adam down in Texas, and when it came, one of the legs was loose on it, and I was like, "Well, can we fix this?" They said, "Okay, we can fix it," and, Renee was standing there, and it's like, "Well, let's what if we pull it off and put something else there?" And so, yeah, let's pull it off. Started doing that. And I said, well, this is something that was thrown out of a wagon because they had to lighten their load. Thought it would be a great idea to bring it with them, but then realized shortly on the trip that they didn't need it. Threw it out. There was a fire. I called Adam up. I said, hey, can I take this desk and remove a leg and take blow torches to it, and really make it look like it was just because that's where a lot of things came from. When you read diaries, they would come upon things cast out along the trail. The trail is furniture. Animals are getting tired. They don't have enough to eat. They're getting weak. Lighten the load. Get out and walk yourself. You just need food and water is what you need. And so that's where that evolution of his desk came from. And it was just like that over and over and over on this project where
Well,
it was
did you have a lot of prep time?
I did. I had a fair I did the initial interview, got the scripts and all, and started breaking down and doing my own research, and then came in for meetings and got up to speed with Renee and the other art directors and met with Pete a few times, and then got a kind of a handle on what our budget was so I could start thinking through that. And then kind of was off for a while they were building the fort, and then came back to it for the big long stretch. And then towards the end, we were kind of losing weather and the strikes were starting to happen. As always, I think we were one of I don't know, there weren't very many shows going on by the time we shut down. And it was twofold. I think, they realized that we were going to start to see strikers come and picket. And it was interesting because they showed up finally when we had moved to a private movie ranch to film some things. And that's where they finally got us and picketed. And then we moved from there back to some work on the Pueblo, and they didn't seem to want to picket on a native land. But by then we had lost a lot of the weather, and trees were starting to bud out, and they were going to realize it was going to be much harder to match. We had Taylor had hurt his ankle and was off for period of time where he couldn't do stunts very well, so we had to rejuggle and shoot other things while we're waiting for him to heal and get strong again. And by the time he came back and we had to go back to sets and try and match, the surrounding territory had changed, and the DP and Pete kind of jumped in. They said, "Y'all stay here," and they jumped in their car one day. I'll never forget it. And tore off to just look at all the things we had left to shoot, and came back and said, "I don't know, I don't know. Everyone go home." So we went home, and they just said, "Well, we're going to edit what we got, and then we'll come back when the weather gets cold again and shoot." And that's what we did. So it was a combination of just some things slowed down production, and then New Mexico for that year, we had a really hard winter, but a early spring,
Right.
and we thought we were gonna have about another month of cold weather, and we had a kind of some light weather come in, and all the trees started to bloom, and that's just hard to deal with when you're looking across.
It's Murphy's Law. It's Murphy's
Yeah,
Law. You know, if you're shooting a snow scene, and I have to
yeah,
speak from recent experience, it
yeah,
will not snow, and you have to make
indeed.
snow. And if you are shooting something that
Yeah,
you don't want snow, then you have to burn it off and get rid of it.
that's right. Yeah, we did a lot of that. The special
Yeah,
effects guys had a big line item for snow.
I bet they did.
Tractor trailers full of snow,
Well, then
and they had
yeah, it was in a majority of the scenes. I
Yeah, and it
special notice of
sometimes we
that.
had it and sometimes we didn't. But
Yeah,
they had a great rig. They had their snow machine mobile on four-wheel drive and had hoses that would go hundreds of feet in either direction and just lay it down. And they were, you know, can't speak highly enough of those effects guys. With all the big fires and the stunts and the snow and all that,
it was a big
it
show for them.
was a
Yeah,
big show for them, but they were up to the task. It was such a well-oiled machine.
yeah. Well,
And,
it's nice when you have people that you work with over and over and over.
yeah, and I felt like they took me in pretty quick. I think all of a sudden, they realized I was in it to win it as well, and I had some chops, as well, and, not that not that you ever phone it in, but there's just different skills you have for every type of job, and this one required us to really watch out and take care of each other. I mean, we're up 10,000 feet and the sun comes out and the snow melts a little, then the sun gets behind the cloud and you're on ice. And you've got to warn people and you got to tell them, put your crampons on, do not climb up there, all that kind of thing. And it gets cold. Don't be macho. There's no the macho people are the ones that end up in the hospital. And we had a little time of adjustment, obviously, when crew comes in from out of state and we're in Albuquerque and they think we're the desert. My house sits at 5,200 feet. Just here on the ground in town, you're facing altitude and then take it up another mile. And even that, for those of us that are conditioned, it's dangerous and difficult.
But all you do is just shop.
Yeah. Shopping a lot of times for us was everyone spread out in a line, and we would walk the bosky gathering wood, gathering things to build with, all that. And then when we were done with everything, we broke it all down and made these wood piles that left them on the reservation for everybody to come and gather firewood. Yeah, and they couldn't have been any better to us on all these different pueblos we were on. I mean, there you have to respect the land, and as long as you show that respect, 'cause it's for those that haven't had much experience around natives, they think of the land completely differently than we do. When we did Runty's Hunting Shack, which was a fun set with a lot of action and all that, we could not dig into the ground. It was, sacred burial ground to them, and when I was on the scout and they were telling us it was a beautiful spot with this incredible bluff behind us and beautiful creeks, the, uh, Santa Fe Creek ran right there, beautiful water, all that, and it was just a glorious place to be, and you could see some ruins, and it was like, "Yeah, that's our people were here." And I was like, "Well, how long?" They were here for like 300 years. I said, "Really?" He goes, "But this is like 500, 600 years ago." And I'm standing there, and one of our greensmen says, "See?" And he holds his hand out like cupped. And I look, and there's a little shard of obviously pottery, Indian pottery. You could see the hand line paint. He goes, "It's all here." And I said, "Well, where's the burial ground?" He goes, "It's all around us over hundreds of years. You don't know where it was."
That's one of the beauties of a New Mexico history. I mean, I'm a New Mexican, so it's one of the beautiful things about New Mexico. So, David, we haven't, I mean, we've talked a lot about the fort, we've talked a lot about the Native Americans, but one thing that we haven't really, made the big dive into is the military encampments. And,
Yeah.
you had a good deal of that
Yes.
and two different sort of encampments. There was the Mormon militia and then there
Yep.
was the US cavalry.
Yep.
And they were distinctly different. And what was your kind of thought process in going into that and making sure that it was different?
Well, the cavalry, obviously, there's a lot of research on that, and this one here, when you get into the Nauvoo Nation, as they call it, the Mormon encampment, they had been there longer, and they were Brigham Young's. He was governor, so this was kind of his national guard in a lot of ways, and that being they were there to kind of stem the tide of non-believers coming in their direction. When people would get to Fort Bridger, you would take two different trails. One Oregon Trail heads north up to Southern Oregon, Northern California, and then there was a southern route that broke and went down towards Salt Lake. And that's where the Mormons decided to go. They, through my reading and understanding, which is limited, I by no means am an expert on this, but my understanding is they went that way and kind of found the Salt Lake and thought, this is almost a godforsaken place. We don't think people will want to come here. We're going to choose it. We're going to find our own sweet water, but we're going to tell everyone the water's salty, the land is barren, not fertile. But in reality, it is. But it's easy to sell that idea to keep pioneers away. Don't go that way, go this way. So he built that. Initial people that traveled out there with him, I think he took were his kind of military seed that came to, didn't know what you're going to find when you get out there. And so they get out there and they set up, and that was a bigger encampment, a bigger force than the cavalry that first arrived that we see. They outnumbered them probably 3-1 at that point. We tried to show that in the fact that the Mormon encampment was much larger. They had bigger tents. They had bigger footprint. They were established like it was their fort. And then when you get into the cavalry, they were much more of a mobile force. They had a little small encampment at one end of Fort Bridger, but then they moved. In the dialogue. They talk about how he had leased them some land, so we moved them out away, and so they became their own smaller encampment. Had more of influence. The cavalry, even though they were going out, the officers were a class society. They would bring nicer things with them, better lamps, better writing tables, all that kind of thing was traveled with them. Where the Mormons were much more utilitarian in function, not form, where it was other way. We get into some of these tents and they have a prettier bed and a prettier desk and better lighting and all that, where the Mormons were really not military trained. They learned it kind of on the job and defected. Probably some of them had been in wars and whatnot, battling in the settling of the West, and then found the religion and became leaders in that regard. And then we were trying to figure out a way to make the tents different. We chose different styles of tents and sizes of tents. And then Renee came up with the idea actually of trying to put these rain flies on the cavalry tents to help distinguish them easily. At a glance, you knew you were somewhere else in case the story cut between the two places. As far as like the encampment supplies, it was much more uniform kind of in the cavalry, whereas the Mormon militia, a lot of those fellows were kind of like National Guard, where they had a homestead with wives and family back, and they would go out into the field, and maybe they brought their quilt from home, and they weren't issued government, standardized equipment. They had to make do with what they had, and so that gave us different textiles and different ways of cooking and that kind of thing. And in that case too, I had a couple tents that were made out of those same fire blankets, so we could burn them, and we had, treated furniture, to help. It's always fire retardant. I always People say, just put that fire block on there, and it's like the special effects guys are so funny. Matt would say, nothing is fireproof. If you burn it long enough, it's going to succumb to the fire. So we can buy time, but don't think just because we spray it that it can survive and survive and survive. You're going to have to replace and feed, and once again, the posts we recreated out of concrete.
When you say that you created it out of concrete, what do you mean by that?
It's like a rebar. It's like doing a plaster lath treatment. Take a rebar down the middle and wrap it in the metal lath, and then slather it with the plaster, fire retardant plaster, and then they would come and the scenics would make it look log like, and then we'd paint it, and then by the time it was on fire, it got blackened very quickly, so you didn't have to worry about the scenic work of it looking like a log. And it was night and action and all that. It was all about buying time so that they could have long takes. He had 3 cameras handheld, moving around all the time. He gets right in there in it. He's an actor slash director. He likes to be present with the actors, not back in some warming tent. He's out there. He may have one small 10-inch screen, on one thing that he's looking at, but he gets down, tells them, gives them direction to, get lower, get down, get up, move over, get the fire. It's just like this crazy kinetic energy he brings to the way we shot, all these action scenes. Because there was a lot of fighting and a lot of action, and the raids on the natives, the raids on the cavalry, the burning of the fort, all these kind of places, and just the action, even in like Runty's, hunting camp. It's a big scene where all of a sudden it's one of those moments where it's like, okay, who's going to draw their gun first? And boom, it's on. And that was an interesting thing there that happened with that. I was having trouble at that point when I was sourcing for that set. It was originally, the concept was they had kind of like rustled a bunch of pigs and were slaughtering them. They'd stole pigs from Bridger. It was the kind of vague backstory originally. And I was like, I just wasn't happy with the, fake pigs I was finding, and it was going to be cost prohibitive to make them. And we had one that came from K&B that, that's a very expensive animal, to have made that looked that real. So we had that one, but I came across a lot of taxidermy that I was able to rent and modified, break the joints and make it articulated with bendable aluminum and stuff in the inside of them. And I had like a wolf and some coyotes and a mama bear and two baby grizzlies and all this stuff. And they said, we want to show Pete the pigs. And I said, let me just talk to, somebody about this. And so one of the producers came talk to me, and I said, look, Isaac's walking into this camp, and these guys are butchering things. I said, wouldn't it be more threatening that they killed a mama bear and the babies and a wolf and big elks? And these are like stone cold, not afraid of anything hunters, big game hunters, and they certainly wouldn't be afraid of some guy walking in their camp. And then it makes it more impressive. These are guys that can stare down a bear and kill it. And Isaac takes them all out. Billy, it's not like some guy just running at them with a butchering saw. These are like stone cold killers, grabbing their weapons, and it shows what level he is as a fighter, And in the end, it really, I think, made much more of an impression, when they're hoisting a grizzly bear up as he enters the camp, And that camp was on the kind of sacred ground area, and it was great. The characters they had were great. There were so many great faces in this show.
Well, y'all did an excellent job of respecting the landscape, but still delivering the set and, making it totally, totally believable.
Yeah, and that extended off camera too. Base camps and all that were very well thought out, and permission was asked. I mean, sometimes things can get in a hurry, and people do things without asking first. That never happened with this crew. I think we all knew what a privilege, because we were going back deep into some of this land, and it was, sacred land to them. They think in hundreds of years and generations from now are going to look back. Much of it they feel has been preserved, and they wanted to keep it that way. We tried to so desperately not to leave footprints.
That's an amazing feat, when you can hopefully leave it better than you found it, which is always, I think, our ideal for sure. For sure. Did you source anything from any of our SDSA?
Yeah, like I said, Rick at ISS was invaluable. Well, the great thing was, in the beginning, he was like, "Hey, we'll fly you out. I've got a great Western package. I want to build
Yeah.
it, and all this kind of stuff." And because the local prop house, actually, there was another film going on that had cleaned out all the Western stuff and taken it. And in some way, at the time, when I first got the job, I went to the local prop houses and found a few things. Like I said, I wasn't like super happy, and it's just so hard because it's such a specific time frame that I was trying to be, authentic to, and wasn't going to go, oh, that broom's okay or whatever. I was like, no, it's not. And so when I went and saw the Western package was gone, and I was like, oh no, but it turned out to be kind of a blessing in disguise, because it really put the pressure back on me to go back to the source material and find another way to get the right stuff, whether it was fabricating or whatever. But then I would talk to Rick, and there were lots of things he had that were very helpful to us.
I mean, it's important, and I think New Mexico is the perfect place, especially for that genre. You have so many people that are so deep into the culture, about there for
And it's
sure.
just wide open. Like people, you get here and there's what, 2.5 million people in the whole state,
I know, I
you
love
know?
that.
Between Austin and San Antonio, there's that many people,
No,
you know?
no, mm-mm,
And you're
no,
35 million in Texas, it's just
yeah.
you I remember one of the first shows I did here, I was talking to the construction coordinator. He'd said, "Oh, you started out in Houston." I said, "Yeah, I did." And he goes, "I had to work there. I just couldn't take it though. Being downtown, I felt so closed in amongst all those buildings." And at the time, looked at him. I said, "Well, you know what? Being out here, I feel like I'm exposed. I
Hmm.
can see for 50 miles everywhere I go. There's nowhere to hide. You can't sneak up on anyone in New Mexico."
Who was your construction coordinator?
This show, American Prario, was Bill Holmquist and Dave Peck, his right hand man. Excellent. The work they did building that fort was just mind blowing.
I noticed that about the fort too. Um, that it was beautiful, beautiful. The ends of the logs were all chopped. They weren't sawn off with a skill saw or, whatever with modern thing. It was all chopped. And I think it gave it a whole different level of of texture, just the way that they were all uneven and they were all very hand hewn.
That was, the concept from the beginning, and that was another nod to Renee on that. There were art directors did we had actually had a book that was a study on log ends, really dive down that deep into it to how to really communicate that, that they're using their hands, and these tools are primitive. It's not chainsaws and all that. Now we did have chainsaws that sped up the process on things, but there was a lot of guys out there swinging axe blades and making it as real as possible. And then the scenic work done, you think those logs are just like that. They're not. The work has to be done to bring it all into kind of a cohesive palette, so to speak. You think, oh, it's all brown. No, it's levels of browns and blacks. And so much of this was at night and just really trying to concentrate on how things are going to look flame lit. We had lots of fires around in there, and of course lots of oil lamps, and we had lamps that were converted. We had teams of wiremen that would work on converting things and checking everything. And of course I became very much more in tune on wick systems and all that kind of thing. And we're constantly trying to get everything to be reliable, because of course you want that lamp in reality might only be 5 years old, but in our time it's 75 years old. So you have to go back mechanically and make it safe, because fire anywhere in New Mexico, of course any set you want to be safe, but it's very dangerous. When you're in the bosque, there's lots of fuel, so to speak, for fires. New Mexico has had lots of bad fires, and we actually, in parts of the pueblo we were on, the Cochise, there had been some bad fires, and we used it to our advantage on the cannibal camp. We actually built that set amongst a burned out stretch trees. Yeah, added that layer of kind of another creepy.
The cannibal camp. It was a French encampment. Was that what
Mhm.
that was?
Yeah, it was described originally kind of as this French cannibal camp, and the cannibal element kind of slipped away, but the name stuck. We didn't really dive that much into it, but the idea was that these were some French ne'er do wells that left the East Coast to go out west, and they got trapped in the mud there along the Rio Grande, because it was literally on the river. We were right on the side of the river. And so the wagons got stuck and broke down. They said, "We'll be back for you." And then the guys never came back, took the money and ran. So that was our idea of how they would survive. So it became that we kind of had a feeling that maybe some people did get eaten, and it kind of the isolation and the
Donner,
desolate
Donner
surroundings. They
did
Donner
some.
Party did a lot of Donner Party reading about that situation, and so that was kind of our thing. It just had this French twist that gave it this really bizarre entrance
Oh,
into it,
it was
and the little girl being the trap that lures them in.
Yep.
Isaac, obviously, in his experience, you don't trust anyone when you're out here. And Sarah's character has this moment of, her mother instinct kicks in. We got to get her back to her parents, and sure, it's the flight, to the trap. They
Mhm.
get there and overtaken, and it was built with these dugouts and hovels, and the wagons were flipped over and half sunk in the mud, and they'd obviously been there a while and knew how to ambush people by the way that they all of a sudden got the drop on them. And when we got the set ready to go, the snow melt was happening. It was later in the schedule, and the river rose. They had to open up some dams upstream from us at the lake and flood, get some more water out for fear of it going through a floodgate. And so the river rose and flooded like half the set. And at
Perfect.
first we're like, oh no, oh no. But happy accident, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It just add this layer of gunk, and it flooded the hovels, and had to redress some things down in there, but it just gave it this whole set. And the ground from the water flowing through
Yeah.
had created these undulating pathways, and the ground almost felt like serpents. It was like these weird grooves and smoothness and shininess to it all because it swept away the top layer of leaves and all. And this area had been burned. So they had to come in and actually top the trees because these giant cottonwoods, the wind came and big giant branches started falling. So we had to clear out, and they came in and made it safe and all. So it was just kind of struggle of a set that in the end, it all just added to the creepiness and the it's
And
fact that it's
but all
trap.
you do is shop,
Yeah,
right?
all we do is
All we do is shop.
all we do is shop. Yeah, and Kelly, my assistant, Kelly Miller, was really great on that set. She kinda took it over, and when we got into the underground hovel and building some of these things, I had found a pile of old hides out at Jeff Henshaw's place that were just left over, and the hair was all off, and they were all stiff and hard, and so my guys threw them in the river, tied ropes on them, and threw them in the river and soaked them, got them soft. Kelly brought them out, and she and the dressers all hand stitched those together, threw them quickly while they were soft on top of the structures, and they sank, and kind of the ribs showed, and you got the skinny people and the ribs of the buildings. It was just this whole conglomeration of imagery that was so key to making that set memorable. It really was.
What a intervention from nature. Just remind you that you're not in charge of the weather at all.
We had a couple other times where we were doing things along the creeks, and the creeks would drop, and there would be modern day debris we would have to go out there and clear out. One time I was like, "Is that a shopping basket sticking up out of the mud over there?" We had to literally go pull this thing out and get it off the set because the water had dropped and there's half a shopping cart.
That's
So,
hilarious.
yeah,
Yeah, but that's what you deal with on a daily basis while you're
that's
shopping.
right.
Well, just looking at the whole experience, I mean, we've talked about a lot of them. Or there anything that we haven't talked about that really pushed the envelope, for you that, felt like it was difficult. I mean, you obviously had, time to kind of process with the strike and all that stuff, happening, thing. But was there anything that you could not find that evidently, I mean, you haven't said that yet. So I'm assuming that if you couldn't find it, you made it.
Yeah, that's kind of the situation we were in. And there was a great collaboration with the prop department, the wardrobe department, scenics and all. We would all lean in and help each other. Tyler Patton, our prop master, was really on top of it. This was like, I think for him, a dream project like it was for me. I mean, the first footage he sent me, his introduction, was him dressed as a mountain man juggling giant primitive axes, you know? I was like, "This is our prop man? This is gonna be awesome." And it was. Our offices were right across each other. We had a great art department. We filmed, our base camp was in Santa Fe at Garrison Studios, which was an old college campus. So it was like set up college like all the different buildings. Wardrobe was over in the fine arts building with the stage and all, and props is across in this building. We were in this building and all this kind of thing. So it was a real fun way in a lot of ways to just walk the sidewalks, get your steps in, and walk over and visit with people, all being there. And our hallway was just full. On one side of the building, it was all art department. So we just had this long, big hallway, and you know how you do. You had 30 sheets of 4x8 black foam core on the wall, each with its own designation of what you're working on. And at first, the research is up, and then eventually, I'm taking down research and putting up the pictures to replace, the real image of what we're really going to use as things go. And it was right down the hall. At the other, there was a kind of a central atrium, and at the other end was where Pete and the producers and all the money people were. And Pete would come down, and there were dogs running around in the building. He had his dog Esso, who's much like him, just a big in your face, just those stories about dogs, people and their dogs have similar personalities, and they were. I mean, they were bonded very great. It was great to see them together. But he would he would just come running through, and he would stop and look, and how you doing on this and how you doing on that. So it was great, and being right in the middle of it, and had great art directors that and all the researchers. It was just, you had all these tools at your disposal. So if you came up against a block, a lot of times we'd all sit and have lunch together, and I could just say, I'm having trouble with this. And someone would chime up, I worked on the show and there was this and that. And, so the communication, and that's what I missed so much during COVID when some of us worked during that. So much happens in the hallways. The little conversations we have as artists and the things you pick up on. You might be having a conversation and the PA sitting right there has the answer for you. But if you can't have that organic experience and feel free to wander and talk and sit down with people, and we're all there because we want to be. It's a business where 99% of everyone you encounter loves their job in one way or another.
So true.
You
So
know,
true. Yeah, we are blessed that way for sure.
we are. I think first bit major job I did was RoboCop 2 way back in the 80s. And that was the one where I gotten out of college and I dabbled with stuff. My ex sister-in-law, is my brother's first wife, was a set decorator, mainly did commercial work in Houston. So I would work for them. My brother, middle brother Charles, was a camera operator. And so I would work with him in those early days where he was in AC and all that, doing a lot of commercial work. And then I met another decorator who got a job as the lead man on RoboCop 2. And she said, "You want to come work on this?" And I had just been interviewing at banks and brokerages and stuff. And I said, "Well, what does it pay?" And she told me, and my eyes lit up. And it was about 3 times what they were offering at the bank. And I get to go do this. I get to go play with robots and cops and all this and run away with the circus is what happened. I didn't look back. Never used that high price education.
That's awesome. Well, David, it has been an absolute pleasure,
Oh yeah,
just sitting and visiting with you. It's like us sitting on the porch and,
that's right.
catching
We-
up, you
We've
know.
done that. And
Yeah,
thank
we
you for always taking my calls.
oh,
And
yeah,
as
glad to
I'm
do it.
sitting in the car going, what am I going to do about this or that? And
Well,
Sage Woods,
back at
uh,
you. I'm gonna
yeah, well,
I'm gonna
I
keep maybe a little tab on those hide teepees, as they're very intriguing.
there you go.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
those
I
are
know
very
where the good stuff is.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you
Yeah.
do. Again, thank you so much for being with us for Inside the Set with Set Decor. I've seen it. I love it. If you haven't watched it, watch American Primeval on Netflix. It's worth the watch. It's a great show and it showcases all of your talents so well. So it was a joy to watch.
It was a joy to be with you today too, Carla.
Yeah. So David Hack, SDSA, Carla Curry, SDSA, signing off.
Anyway.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.